Across the world, people have their housing costs taken away as much as half of their income. Have you ever thought of trying to change that? The good news is there is a way. House hacking is real, and we are here to show you how other people just like you have made it happen. Welcome to the House Hacking Podcast. And here is your host, house hacking expert, Andrew Kerr.
Welcome back, everyone, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate all of you for listening to the show, leaving some great positive reviews, and if you haven't had the chance yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you always get the latest episode when it comes out. Now today we're going to talk with another house hacker that did this income suite style house hacking where they finished out the basement. And while we've had a couple of these episodes, the one I really like about this is they had a traveling nurse stayed with them. They sort of targeted that mid-range tenant. And what we're really trying to do with all these case studies is get you to see the different types of house hacks along with the different types of tenant bases so you can blend together the ideal situation and style that works for you and your family. Now, what I really love about this is she treated her tenant so well that this tenant actually moved with them between properties. So it's another little thing you'll pick up on this episode. But with that said, before I give away too much of it, let's just go ahead and dive into the episode. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate your willingness to actually share the story. So how are you and where are you calling in from?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being asked. So I'm in Denver, Colorado, and it's actually snowing today. And yesterday it was 75 degrees. So we have to get used to these big changes, but it's all good here.
Oh my goodness, you're already getting snow. I mean, we finally, I live down in New Orleans and we finally got the just cooler weather coming in of like the 60s, and last night it barely hit 59, but the snow actually sounds really nice right about now.
Yeah, it's pretty for a day.
And does the snow just usually blow in from the mountains, and does it last long at this time of the year, or does it actually stick and stay around for a while?
No, actually, Denver is one of the sunniest places in the States. And so as soon as it snows, it's usually gone within the next day or two at the latest. We rarely get, anything more than 6 inches. And the sun is so intense, it just melts it right away. So it's pretty nice, and because you're closer to the sun, even when you're outside and it's supposedly 30 degrees, you could still be outside with just like a thin long sleeve shirt because the sun just warms you up so much.
Yeah, that sounds like a winter that I could definitely deal with.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're on. I know a bit about your story. I think it's really, really cool what you've done with sort of this house hacking, reducing your housing costs. Could you just sort of give us this high level summary of sort of your experience with reducing your housing costs?
Yeah, so we basically, a year after moving to Denver, we started house hacking. We didn't know it was referred to house hacking 4 years ago. I'm not sure when the term kind of took off, but we learned about Airbnb about 5 years ago, and we ended up finding, when we moved to Denver, we lived in our first house, and then we fixed it up and then decided to move again to this subdivision, or not subdivision, suburb, I should say, called Arvada, which is just outside of Denver. And we house hunted for the reason to house hack. And so that was our first house that we did with house hacking. And so it was for about 3 years in that house. And then we decided to move back into the original house we first moved into when we moved to the Denver area. And we remodeled our basement and are now house hacking our basement. And our current tenant, or we call her our roommate right now, because she's been with us now off and on for about a year. She stayed with us in Arvada, and now she's staying with us here in Denver proper.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good tenant if she's following you around to the cities that you live in, and you like her enough where she's able to keep staying with you.
Yeah, she's great. She's a traveling nurse. We get along really well, but she's also rarely home. If she's not working, she's just up in the mountains, exploring, just doing all sorts of stuff, exploring Colorado. So we're always commenting about her energy. We just have no idea where she gets her energy. But
Cool.
yeah, it's been great. So,
all right, well, let's really dig into this. So you had mentioned years before you moved to Denver, you had actually first started hearing about Airbnb. And was that what sort of sparked the idea of doing stuff for you? And because I know you said you started doing house hacking before you even realized it was called house hacking.
Right. Yeah. So we heard about Airbnb. We were living in Ohio before. We were there for my job for about 3 years. And I think that's kind of when Airbnb was starting to pick up. And so we were looking at Airbnb as just a way to find places to stay wherever we travel. But then we made the decision that we were going to move to Colorado because I used to live here before when I was in middle school and high school, and I always knew it was a place I wanted to come back to. And so when my husband, Justin, he started looking with his work to transfer to Denver. And we got lucky and he got approval for a transfer. It was over the summer, but I worked for a university and was really involved with the orientation. And I told them I would stay through the orientation before I moved. And so we essentially had to live apart for about 2 months. And, the cheapest way to do that was for him to find a room to rent until I was able to move there. And so we found on Airbnb this couple who rented out their basement, and it was a nice setup. It had its own kitchen. They used the basement as their living room, but on the off of the living room, they had a bedroom and a private bathroom for him. So he moved in with them. We arranged it again on Airbnb, and it was awesome for him. They were such a welcoming couple. They introduced him to all of his friends, or all of their friends, I should say. And it was just an instant community for him and made the transition for both of us, because I obviously met them too when I moved to Colorado, and they introduced me to their friends as well. And it was just an instant community when we moved here. It was amazing. And us had just such a great experience with him staying there that we thought, well, that's a pretty good idea. Not only are you meeting really cool people, but you're getting the added benefit of helping paying your housing costs.
Yeah.
So when we first moved to Denver, we bought this house that was a fixer-upper, and we bought it before we really knew that we wanted to do house hacking. And so we didn't house hack our first house that we fixed up, but once we fixed it up is when we started looking for our next home. And that's when we looked for a house with the intention to house hack. So we were looking for a house that was able to offer a private living space similar to what he had, but also a way to enter into the space somewhat privately.
Yeah.
So maybe where they weren't going through our front door, and so they had their own privacy and we had ours. And so we ended up finding a split level house, so a tri-level house. And when it was basically 4 levels because they had finished out the basement. And so what we did is we sectioned off like the lower 2 levels to be the renting space. So where we would list it on Airbnb.
Great. So this house that you fixed up, that was a split level. This was the first house you moved into Denver, or this is the second one out in the suburb?
The second one.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we first moved it's a little confusing because we've kind of done a full circle.
Yeah.
So when we first moved to Denver, we bought this little bungalow is what I call it. We fixed it up. We then found our second home in Arvada, right outside of Denver. And we moved into that home, but we kept our bungalow and rented it out to long-term renters. And then one day I was doing some calculations and I was like, we can save a lot of money if we sell our Arvada house and then move back into our bungalow in Denver. And I think we can also still work it out if we fix up our basement to continue doing house hacking in our bungalow. And so that's where we're at right now, is back in our bungalow, and we had finished up our basement and rent that out now.
Awesome. So let's dig into each of these different scenarios. I mean, let's start with that first one. So when you're in Ohio, do you remember roughly, did you guys own a house in Ohio, or were you renting at the time?
No, we were just renting.
Do you remember what you were paying?
We were only meant to be there temporarily.
Okay. Do you remember roughly what you were paying for rent, and what type of place were you renting?
It was so affordable there. It was a $700 a month rent. It was outside of Cincinnati. And it was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house.
Okay.
Probably about right at 1,000 square feet.
Okay. And then you moved to Colorado, or he moved first and did the Airbnb, and then you bought this bungalow, and you mentioned you fixed it up. Did you buy it and then fix it up, or did you fix it up while you were living in it? I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was an experience. So we bought it and fixed it up and lived in it while we fixed it up.
Oh, yeah.
So it was essentially my job. I wasn't able to find a job in what I did right away. And I knew that it would take a while because my career is a pretty niche area. And so when my husband got the job transfer, we decided that we would find a fixer-upper, because that's the time when I was like really into those HGTV, fix-up TV shows. And I was like, ooh, that could be a fun project. And so we decided to find a fixer-upper, and we lived in the basement area, which was not nicely finished at all. I mean, it had carpet, and it had some of that fun 70s, 80s wood paneling all over.
Super stylish, yeah.
Yes, yeah, it was grooving. And it had a really cool retro bar, actually, and a really, really tiny bathroom. And so we decided to just live down there, and while I fixed up the upstairs.
Okay.
And so I acted as the general contractor, and I hired a bunch of subs to come in and help me, totally redo it. So it was a big first project, taking down walls and everything.
Oh, wow.
And it took about 4 to 5 months until we were able to move upstairs.
Okay. All right. So you bought it. Do you remember what year was that when you bought it?
So we've been here for 5 years about. So I want to say it was 2013. Yeah, in 2013. We actually closed on September 11th.
Okay.
2013.
And do you remember roughly what you bought it for?
Yeah, we paid $200,000 for it.
And do you remember what type of loan did you do at that time? And how much did you actually have to put down on the house?
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics, but it was just a conventional loan. And I'm pretty sure we put the standard, like the 20% down,
okay,
without paying PMI.
Okay. And did the loan include any of the renovation costs, or your plan was let's put the 20% down and then we've got some savings and we'll keep earning money to keep doing the renovations? Okay.
Yeah, so we used our savings for all the renovations.
Okay.
Yeah. But once it was done, and when we were looking for the second house to move into, we actually refinanced the bungalow. And so the appreciation in Denver was pretty crazy around that time and up to just recently.
Yeah.
Appreciation, I think they said, was in the double digits, like about 10% a year. So our value had increased so much after doing the rehab. We were able to pull out back out all of our rehab cost and I think a little extra cash as well.
Oh man, so you got all the rehab money back and a little bit extra, which essentially was some of the money you put for the down payment in, and now you've got it refinanced and you've got this steady payment. So when you bought it and you refinanced it, did you specifically, when you were refinancing it, know you were going to move yet? Or were you like, let's start to refinance it because we want to start looking around for some other stuff? Or was it just you happened to refinance, then you started to look around?
Yeah, it was actually like we decided we wanted to move. And we initially always thought we would just sell this house after we finished rehabbing it. But also at that time, when we were looking into selling it, we were also hearing about the rent rates in Denver and how they were pretty high too. And so we looked into how much we could rent it out as a long-term, to a long-term tenant. And we were able to rent it out for about $2,050 a month. And so we decided to keep it just because the rent that we could get for it was so good. And then once we decided we were going to rent it is when we looked into the refi stuff, just because it was recommended.
Yeah, well, it was really smart that you did refinance it before you left, because if you refinance it when you're still living in it, for the folks that are listening in, is you can actually refinance it and your rates as a primary residence are very different and better than if she were to move out and then go back and refinance it. She would have paid a lot higher rates and terms on the loan because it would have been considered at that point an investment property. So yeah, it was really smart that you did it in that direction. And so you said your mortgage was about $2,050 a month. Did that include the taxes and insurance, or did you pay those separately?
Well, no, the rent was $2,050 a month that we got for it.
And then what was your payment on it then after you refinanced it?
I think at that, so it was about $1,500 a month.
Okay. And was that $1,500 with mortgage and insurance in there?
Yeah, that was with everything wrapped in. Taxes, insurance, mortgage.
So you got a good spread in there. You're making like essentially $550 a month from your rent to your mortgage. And did you hire a property manager, or did you and your husband decide, we're going to do this on our own, we're going to find a tenant? And
yeah, so we found a property manager that was offering a la carte. So we hired them to find the tenant, like do the advertising and find the tenant and put them under a contract. And then after that, we managed it ourselves. So when you do that, you usually have to pay almost the full amount of the first month's rent to the property management company. Everybody has their different rates, but I think that's what it was for us. It was not quite the first full month, but close to it, if I remember correctly. And then after that, they were hands off, and we just managed it ourselves. So we weren't paying like 10% a month to a manager.
Well, that's a really cool thing that they actually broke it and did it a la carte, where if you just say, here's only the portion that I needed help with is finding the tenants, and they take care of that. I really like that route that you can go. So you took over the tenants, they put them in place. How'd you manage the tenant ongoing? Did you use any sort of software to collect rents or maintenance, or was it just mail a check or PayPal?
Yeah, it was really that, just mailing a check. Since we live nearby, Arvada, where we moved to, wasn't very far away. It was maybe a 30-minute drive to the house. So they mailed us a check. It was actually a really, really sweet deal because, the tenant, their dad co-signed on it. And so their dad was the one mailing the check every month, and they mailed it usually about 2 weeks early.
Oh man. Yeah.
So it was like the most ideal tenant situation you could have.
Yeah. That was that's probably well worth the fee that you had to pay the property manager to find a tenant like that, where you get the dad who co-signed and is taking care of the rent.
Yeah, it was perfect. And we knew that was just a very lucky situation. We weren't taking it for granted.
Yeah.
That was just, so we didn't really, it was our only rental property. So we didn't really have a need to get any like specific software or anything like that. So, okay.
All right. So you refinanced the place because you knew you were going to put a tenant in, and you wanted to start to go find a property, and you were looking in Arvada, the suburb of Denver, specifically for a house hack. Was this your idea, your husband's idea? Like, were you both on board, or did it take some convincing? Explain that sort of situation, the idea of like, okay, we're specifically looking for house hacking now.
Yeah, like once we saw his experience with it, living with our friends now, we just, knew for both of us that was something we would want to do. Um, I've really been my family has been in real estate for a while, so I've been exposed to, what can come up, the positives and negatives. But, and I hadn't really thought about us doing real estate in the sense of someone actually living with us. But it just made so much sense with such a great experience that he had and just the community part of it, really. And so, we were both sold on the idea pretty much immediately once we had finished our rehab on our little bungalow and started looking at other properties. We said that we definitely wanted to do something that we could rent it out and, help save money on mortgage interest, taxes, and all that. And also just to kind of return the favor that the couple he lived with did for us. So paying it forward, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because Denver is growing rapidly, and especially around that time period when we moved and several years after, there was just a high percentage of people moving to Denver every day. And so, we knew that it was likely going to be people moving to Denver, that we could help out to get acquainted with the area and share our connections and resources. So hopefully they enjoy it as much as we do.
Yeah, that was really cool that you guys were saying like, hey, we want to do this. We know it's financially beneficial for us, but at the same time, it's a way for us to pay it forward as well. So yeah, that's really cool. So you started looking, you were both on board, you found this sort of split level house. What year was that when you bought it?
So I want to say that was 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, because we bought our bungalow in 2013 in September, and then by the next year in October, we were already in the Arvada house.
Okay. And do you remember roughly what you bought that house for?
Yeah, so we also did some rehab on that house, and so we bought it for $310, and we did something fairly unique with it that most people probably would do with their primary home, but we actually bought it with a hard money loan.
Okay. Can you explain real quick what a hard money loan is for anyone listening that doesn't know what that is?
So it's essentially a short-term loan, and it's based off, like, you qualify for the loan based off the property that you're buying, not necessarily your income. And it's used a lot by investors who may be flipping homes.
Yep.
So the intent is not to keep that loan for very long. It's just to be able to keep it for maybe 4 to 6 months, or shorter if you're lucky. But the benefit about a hard money loan is that they'll generally finance 100% of the purchase price. And then some of them will also include a certain dollar amount for the rehab. And so since we knew we wanted to find a house to rehab, or needed at least some rehab, we were introduced to the idea of using a hard money loan initially to purchase the house and get the funds to do the rehab. And then we would refinance with a conventional loan.
Oh, cool. So you bought it, you did the hard money loan, you renovated it. How much did you roughly have to put into it to sort of divide it up the way you wanted it to actually be a place where you could live in the one portion of the split level and the other portion could be rented out?
Yeah, it was, so the home was $310 to buy, and I think I put about $30,000 in it. And we did the whole house. It wasn't just setting up the tenant space. We remodeled the kitchen. We put new flooring throughout the entire house, painted. And that was, just some tile work. But that was about it. The house, we took down a wall to open up our kitchen and living area. But like the space where we were going to rent out, it was already pretty much set up. So one of the levels was just the living area, and all we did was we set it up with like a little mini fridge, microwave, coffee pot, and that was about it. And then we had a sofa and a TV to make a living room for the guests. And then they just had to walk down a few steps, and that's where it opened up to their bedroom and bathroom. And then from the living area, from the guest living area, you could walk up these short staircase to our kitchen and living room. And I put a doorway at the bottom of the staircase to close off their living room from our kitchen and living room, just for sound barrier mostly.
Yeah.
So when we both had our TVs on, we didn't hear each other, but we let the guests know they were always welcome to use our kitchen.
Oh, cool. And so you bought it, you did the work, you refinanced it. Do you remember once you refinanced what your actual housing payment was for that split level property?
Yeah. So I think we refinanced it for it appraised after we bought it and did the rehab. It appraised for about $350,000. So, it didn't appraise enough extra, I should say, to where we were able to pull out all of our money that we were putting into it. So the total payment that we ended up with for mortgage, taxes, and insurance, I think was around $2,050 or $2,100, one of those two. So it was a little bit of a bigger payment than we had with the bungalow.
Okay, so you're around $2,100 a month. It's all set up, renovated. You refinanced out of the hard money loan to conventional loan, and now you're ready to start finding tenants. And was your idea specifically short-term rental, Airbnb, VRBO? And which platform did you decide to use, and how did you decide to price the unit, and all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, we decided to use just Airbnb. And once we had it set up on Airbnb, we were just looking around our area to see what people were renting their space out for. And, most people, they had a bedroom to rent out. And whereas we had a bedroom and a living area and like a little, coffee station, I should say, or kitchenette, I should say. And so we knew we might be able to get a little bit more. So we probably added maybe 20% more to the average rent we were seeing by the room in our immediate area.
Okay. And then, so how did it end up working out? You posted it, you figured out what your rent was. I mean, how often did you have people in there? Was it people circling through every single week?
Yeah. So we got people in pretty quickly. We had a few short-term, like just 2 days guests in initially, but it wasn't long that we then had a guest who stayed with us for about, I want to say she stayed with us for at least 4 months. And she was building her house in Denver.
Oh.
And so she needed a place to stay, because I guess her lease was up. And since she was building a house, she didn't want to sign a new lease. And so she opted to just go rent, a room or a space somewhere that she could do it for a shorter period of time. And so she stayed with us for about 4 months. And that was our first long-term guest. And then after her, we mostly had at least 1 month stay guests. So I'm not sure, maybe because we offered a living room and a little kitchenette, it was really appealing to the guests who wanted to stay a little longer. So most everybody we had was with us for at least 1 month. And it typically averaged out for 3 months at a time.
Man, that is wonderful that you had these people. So were these folks that were doing business in Denver, or was it your typical tours? Like someone's coming over from Europe and wants to be in Denver for a month, or someone's, living on one of the coasts and just wants to spend a winter in Denver so they can go hiking and skiing as much as they want?
Yeah, it was actually traveling nurses was the majority of them who stayed with us. They would stay at a 3-month stint because that's the contract period for most traveling nurses. And then we had one guest stayed with us because they came for medical treatment. They were actually, it was unfortunate, they had a type of cancer and they were experimenting with the cannabis, and the medical marijuana that's allowed here in Denver. So they came as a trial period to see if it would help them. But a lot of them were moving here, and needing just wanted a little bit of extra time to try to find a place to live rather than trying to find it in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
By staying at least a month, it allowed them to kind of get to know some of the neighborhoods a little bit better before committing for like a year's lease or purchasing a property. But yeah, most of them were traveling nurses, I would say.
And, what were you, your payment was around $2,100 a month. What were you really averaging then for these month-long, stays people were at?
We got about between $1,300 and $1,400 a month for the month long.
Yeah. So, you basically more than cut your housing payments in half at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great. Yeah. It definitely helped because, we weren't really prepared for that much of a payment to make, we made it work. We were able to do it without renting it out, but it really kind of thinned us out with our finances. And so house hacking just made it so much more manageable and allowed us to have more flexibility with our budget.
Yeah, that's great. And then, you mentioned you had a lot of traveling nurses. Was there something specific you did for your Airbnb that you said, great for traveling nurses, or were there other websites you listed it on? Is there any tip or trick there?
No, at that time we only listed it on Airbnb and we didn't even make any specific reference, for traveling nurses. But I think, the fact that we offered their own living room and kitchenette and it had a private bathroom as well, I think was a big draw for people wanting to stay longer than a few days.
Yeah.
And we also allowed pets.
Oh.
So I think that helps a lot too. I know that one of our guests, or I call her our roommate now because this is her 4th contract she's staying with us. She's come back to Denver 4 times for her contract with her traveling nurse contracts. And she said that in between, once she was in Arizona, she couldn't find any Airbnb spaces that allowed her to bring her dog. And so I think that was a big draw as well, allowing pets. Like, we knew we would allow pets because we have 2 dogs and a cat of our own. And so we had rehabbed the Arvada house to have really durable. We used this laminate flooring that was waterproof and scratch resistant. So we went with kind of like a higher level of laminate flooring for the house. And so we weren't as concerned if, a pet had an accident or had big claws, if, we weren't worried about wood floors being scratched up or carpet being stained. So I think that's a nice tip if people are trying to rehab a space, for guests to use some sort of pet resistant flooring.
Yeah, it sounds like the 2 big things that you did to really make it stand out was it wasn't just a room, but it was a room and a private bedroom with a living area and this sort of little kitchenette coffee setup. And then allowing pets seemed to make your listing really, really stand out.
Yeah. And then I think, I don't think it's totally necessary, but we did sort of offer their private entry area. It was through our garage, so you can be creative about it. It doesn't have to be, an entry area like a front door. We had them just go through our garage. We gave them their own keypad code to open the garage. They went in and entered the house from the garage. So it wasn't like a standard front door, but it worked, for their entry.
Yeah. So now you're back living in the bungalow. So did you end up selling that house there, or did you put tenants in and then you moved back to your bungalow in Denver?
Yeah. So we actually decided to sell it. I was doing some calculations. It was after I heard about this new lifestyle called, FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early. I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with it. And so I discovered that and was really researching more about, achieving financial independence. And so then I sat down and started adding up all of our costs, with our Arvada house. And I knew what the cost was with the bungalow. And I was comparing the two, and I was like, we could save ourselves $7,000 a year, which for us is a substantial amount if we move back to the bungalow. And that's not even factoring in the house hacking, of how much we were saving. I was just trying to compare apples to apples. Here's our mortgage and interest here. Here's our mortgage and interest and taxes and insurance at the other place. And here's all of our utility expenses with both properties. And it would save us $7,000 a month if we moved back to the bungalow. And our tenant who, was living in the bungalow for 3 years, the one with his dad paying, he had moved back home. And so we were looking at trying to rent it out or selling it, actually. And we already weren't able to find new renters for the same rent amount. I think we just got lucky. And then we actually tried to list it for sale to see about selling it. And then that's when I was, learning more about FI and other real estate methods. And I was like, you know what? If we sell our bungalow, which has a tenant, we're going to have to pay taxes on the capital gains if we sell it.
Yeah. And
I'm not prepared to do a 1031 exchange, which allows you to defer your capital gains tax. It's a little bit more complicated. I won't get into it, but I was like, but if we sell our Arvada house, which is our primary home, then we won't have to pay any taxes.
Yeah, because you're married, gains up to $500,000 in appreciation are all tax-free because it's been your primary residence.
Exactly. So and then on top of that, we would save $7,000 a month for just our monthly costs of owning a home. I was like, I think we should just move back into our bungalow and sell our Arvada house. Because we want to invest in real estate, and that would have been the best way for us to be able to take back, the money we put into it and build up our cash reserves to then invest in future real estate.
Yeah.
So that's what we decided and then we looked at our bungalow and we said, well, how can we house hack the bungalow? And we decided we would just remodel our basement, and make a bigger bathroom and do a similar setup. It would like the whole basement is the entire space of our upstairs. So we converted it. We reconfigured the space where it has, again, its own living room, set up the little kitchenette area, and then made a private bathroom and ensuite bedroom and an ensuite bathroom.
And did you add any sort of kitchen or kitchenette downstairs, or did you still sort of, if they needed a full kitchen, they could come upstairs?
Yeah, to save money, we didn't add a kitchen sink or anything. So we just, and we actually like that engagement typically with our guests. And so we decided to just share our kitchen. But we put down a mini fridge, a microwave, and a coffee pot, just like the last place.
Yeah, and then so your mortgage on this is about $1,500. You like the engagement, but if someone else was sort of in a similar situation and said, I'd rather not, I mean, you could have closed it off theoretically and put in a little bit bigger of a kitchen down there. So it could have been two full separate spaces.
Yeah, I mean, we could have added, a kitchen sink if we wanted to. I'm not sure how the coding would have worked by adding like a stove, it might have been a little bit more challenging that way. But if we wanted to put more money in, we could have, but we only had 30,000 to put into it. And we pretty much ate every penny of that with just the things that we did.
Yeah.
It's really expensive to rehab in Denver.
I can only imagine. All right. So you're back in the bungalow. You sold the split level. Any appreciation you got, didn't have to pay taxes on because it was your primary residence. You're in the bungalow. You still have the payment around $1,500 a month. What are you in the downstairs basement? Was that all still, looking for a long-term tenant, or was your plan still short-term rental? Let's try to find more traveling nurses.
Yeah. So we decided to do short-term tenants again. And we only listed it on Airbnb. And so our first several tenants were short-term, like two nights, 3 nights. And we got pretty spoiled with our month-long tenants, month-plus long tenants up in Arvada. And it was getting to be a lot of work to change out the space between these two nights or 3-night guests, that we just decided that we rather just solely advertise to traveling nurses. So right now we have our roommate, who's been with us for 4 times now. And, we arrange it off of Airbnb with her. She just pays us directly. But we have decided that once she leaves in early December, we're only going to advertise to traveling nurses. We're no longer actually going to list the space on Airbnb, but we're just going to utilize these Facebook pages or groups that traveling nurses use and other websites that they use to find housing when they go for a contract, to hopefully find more. Because we're only 10 minutes from several major hospitals in Denver. So it's very convenient, I would say, for any traveling nurse.
Yeah, that's great. So skip the Airbnb. You don't have to pay them any more fees, and you just advertise directly to the nurses in the Facebook groups. So what are you getting right now for rent, and what do you think, once your sort of roommate that's been with you 4 times as a traveling nurse leaves, what you think you'll be able to get for rent for that downstairs space?
Yeah, so we've been charging her $1,300 because that was how much she was paying in Arvada. And so when she leaves, though, we may try to increase it by $100. So try to get $1,400 a month, and see if that takes. We might have to play around with it, but we do think we could probably get $1,400 a month. Yeah.
So even if you're still stuck at the $1,300, and maybe you don't get that $1,400, even if you do, I mean, your housing costs are like $1,500. So you're living in a high cost of living area of Denver for a couple $100 a month, and in a bungalow that you fully renovated when you bought it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it all just kind of worked out serendipitously, just how, people use these methods today, intentionally to build up their real estate portfolios or keep more cash in their accounts. And like the steps we took, we didn't realize we were following these popular methods, but yeah, it worked out great for us. So.
Yeah, it sounds like a really cool story. I mean, so if you're sort of thinking back through this experience of house hacking before you knew it was actually called house hacking, what do you feel like your biggest win or success was over this period?
Well, I mean, obviously the financial savings is one, but what I find even better is just, the community that you build, the relationships that you build. So, with our roommate now, we've become pretty close friends, and we'll have someone to visit. Since she travels all the time with her job, it'll be great because if we could easily visit her wherever she's at. And so that, I think, is one of the biggest wins. And also, I guess tying into the financial gain is, since we allow dogs, and she has a dog and we have a dog, we help each other out with dog walking, pet sitting sometimes. So normally you might have to pay someone to do that, but we kind of have like a mutual trading of helping each other out.
That's a really cool little side benefit. On top of the whole saving tons of money living in a high cost of area, being able to increase your savings rate, you're also getting some free pet sitting too, and building this good friendship in a community of it. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's just like, it's music to our ears when she's like, hey, can I take the dogs to the dog park? I'm like, of course.
Yeah, that's an easy one. I'd be like, yes.
Yes, please.
What type of dogs do you have?
We have 2 Labradoodles.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we've got 2 Boston Terriers, so we're big dog lovers as well.
Yeah, they're fun. And then she has like a husky Malamute that looks like a wolf, so she has a pretty big dog herself.
Oh, cool. All right,
yeah.
So thinking back again through that experience, what do you feel like your biggest challenge was, or if you could go back and change something and do something differently, what would you do?
Yeah. There's so few negatives with our experience, once we started house hacking. But I guess probably the more challenging time of it was when we did just have the shorter term guests. So shorter term, meaning like 2 nights stay. And if we had anybody coming in the next day or the same day, just trying to coordinate time to get it cleaned, because we were both working 2 day jobs, so just finding the time to get that space ready during that transition. But but that's the beauty of this, you can always adjust to your lifestyle. And so for us, we decided the 2 nights guests just really aren't worth it for us, and we'd rather have the month long. And so when you're doing that, you don't have to worry about this space hardly ever.
Yeah. So thinking through the experience that you had, if you were to leave your current house, whether staying in Denver or move somewhere else, would you do a house hack again?
Oh, absolutely. I just don't know if we'll ever stop doing it, honestly. Some people talk about when they have kids. Well, we have a 2.5-month-old now, and we have a nurse downstairs. I mean, what better situation can you have as new parents?
Yeah. So yeah, talk about having a cool tenant with an ability. It's like nurse living on site, and that you've built this great relationship with. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of this extra benefit on top of everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, thank goodness we haven't needed to ask her for any assistance yet, but that's a reassuring feeling. And I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, well, we have kids, so we're not interested in doing it. Or when we have kids, we'll probably stop. I mean, I can understand why you wouldn't, but for us, it's, again, on top of the financial, it's a community building, and the benefits just outweigh, I guess, maybe the inconvenience of having more space to yourself or privacy.
Yeah. And in reality, I think it's scary at first when we're not used to it. And then once we get used to it, it just becomes a second nature of like, oh yeah, it's actually not that bad. And like you said, you'd be like, oh yeah, we'll probably do it as long as we can. Like it's normal for us now.
Yeah. Yeah. I maybe like one way for people to warm up to the idea is go be a guest first. If they haven't yet, be a guest for the first, in someone else's Airbnb space, and see how it works out between you and the host. And it kind of gives you an idea of what it's like for yourself to be a host. And I think by my husband being a guest first, that's what really opened up our eyes, to being host ourselves.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And I love your story. I really appreciate you being on and sharing that with us. But before we let you go, I'd like to ask all of our guests a set of final 6 questions that we call the
Famous 6.
So it's 6 questions, rapid fire succession. Are you ready for it?
Sure thing.
Awesome. All right. So number one, what is your favorite personal finance blog or book that you've read recently?
Well, I honestly don't read a whole lot. So I guess I could say the Choose FI. I listen mostly to their podcast.
Yeah.
And then I like to go, they have a great website to go on and try to catch up on any tips that you heard in some of their podcasts interviews. But that's what really got me into this new mindset, new lifestyle of, and why we would try to house hack forever.
Yeah.
If we can.
I love their podcast. I think I'm around episode 60. I just found it beginning of this year, so I'm slowly catching up. But I like the fact that I already know there's several years ahead of me, so I can listen to 2, 3, 4 episodes a week and know that there's still more coming. But that's a really good one.
Yeah, definitely. And I know there's others that are older than theirs, but that's where I was first introduced. And so stick with that one for now.
Yep. And I think I know the answer to the second one, especially with you being in Denver. Do you have a favorite real estate related blog or podcast?
Yeah. So that'll be Bigger Pockets.
Yep. I knew that was coming.
Yeah. It's, when we first moved to Denver, I thought I would try to flip some houses after I rehabbed our own house. And then I was quickly awoken to reality that, flipping houses in Denver was just a very challenging thing to do unless you had loads and loads of cash on you. But I didn't know about Bigger Pockets then. And then, a year or so later, my friend mentioned, we were talking about real estate and she mentioned about Bigger Pockets. And then I started listening. I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I know about this, a year ago? I probably wouldn't have quit so early.
Yeah. So. And then number 3, what has been your favorite travel destination so far?
Well, I have 2. I really love New Zealand and Kenya.
Oh, where'd you go when you're in Kenya?
So we went and saw the Masai Mara. We stayed in a Maasai village. We flew into Nairobi and stayed there for a few nights, and then went out to stay with the Maasai for about 5 days, and then did the Masai Mara, safari with them. It was amazing.
Yeah,
absolutely amazing.
Very cool. So oddly enough, that it's funny that you mentioned that. So a couple years ago, I actually used to work for an aid organization, and we did aid work in Kibera, which is a slum of Nairobi, Kenya. So I've had a chance to go to Nairobi and also went out to the Masai Mara. I really loved my time in Kenya.
Yeah, living, or I shouldn't say living, but staying with the Maasai, that was just a life-changing event. It really taught you to recognize what's important in life, and that's the people you're with. They didn't care about, all the materialistic items or living up to the Joneses. And so it really rooted me when I was there and just changed my perspective thereon after on, what's worth living, Yeah,
very cool. All right. So number 4, what is next on your travel or vacation list?
Well, I could say for sure we're going to Hawaii over the summer. It'll be my first visit, but we're going to go with my husband's family. But so that was like the family choice. I'm happy to go to Hawaii, but where I really want to go to, though, as our own trip choice is Chile and Peru.
Oh, did you already have that on the books yet?
Yeah, we did. And then we found out I was pregnant. It's postponed it for probably at least a year or 2. We were actually supposed to be there this last summer to see the total solar eclipse that was going through Chile and Argentina. So once we saw the total solar eclipse here in the U.S., we were like, where can we see it next? And it was happening next in Chile and Argentina. And so we had planned the trip and then had to cancel it. So
Well, you'll be able to get there, I'm sure of it, especially when you're house hacking and you're able to save this extra money. So
exactly. Yeah, it will happen.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will for you. So that moves us on to number 5. What is the biggest bucket list item on your list that you have yet to accomplish?
Well, I guess it's just achieving financial independence. So, we're doing it through the route of real estate. And so our goal is to get 20 doors is what we think we'll need to essentially retire, or at least completely supplement our income right now. So if we can do that, then we can both quit our day jobs and live the life of traveling.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty awesome bucket list item to work towards. And then number 6, what's your favorite life hack?
Some people don't really see this as a fun thing or a glamorous thing to do, but I would say using public transportation. It sounds a little boring, but we actually opt to use public transportation as much as we can. Because you don't have to worry about the stress of traffic around you. You can read or pay closer attention to like the podcasts and other music things that you want to listen to. And you save money, not having to spend it, on like we went down to one car because we can use public transportation a lot. So we're saving money on not having a car payment or paying insurance. And by using the bus or light rail in our area.
That sounds like a pretty good life hack and also personal finance hack as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for being on and you're sharing your story. I think it's really cool what you've did and sort of how it's evolved and how it's helping you actually get closer to achieving that big bucket list item of getting to FI. So again, thanks for being on and sharing your story.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the House Hacking Podcast. For more up-to-date information on house hacking, to access links and resources mentioned in today's show, and connect with a guest and host, head over to www.fibrei.com. That's www.fibrei.com, where your house hacking journey begins.